The most disturbing aspects of the lands between predate the Golden Order itself, rooted in cosmic horror and ancient forgotten atrocities that writhe beneath the surface of every crumbling ruin, every blood-soaked battlefield, every whispered legend that the demigods would prefer remain buried. Long before Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring, long before the Erd Tree cast its golden light across a fractured world, there existed forces so primordial and so utterly alien to human comprehension that their very presence warped reality, twisted flesh into unrecognizable forms, and seeded nightmares that would echo through millennia. These are not the sanitized histories carved into stone by the victors, not the gilded myths propagated by the Two Fingers, but the raw, visceral truths that lurk in the shadows of every catacomb, every forgotten temple, every blood-drenched altar where something unspeakable once demanded sacrifice. The Lands Between is not merely a fantasy realm of knights and magic. It is a cosmic graveyard, a place where gods warred and bled, where entire civilizations were erased not just from existence, but from memory itself, where the very concept of death was imprisoned and perverted until it became something far worse than oblivion. What you think you know about Elden Ring, the surface-level lore of demigods squabbling over fragments of power, is merely the thinnest veneer over an abyss of existential dread, body horror, and atrocities committed on scales both intimate and apocalyptic. Beneath the golden facade of Marika's reign lies a foundation built on genocide, on the systematic erasure of entire peoples and their gods, on the imprisonment of fundamental forces of nature, on experiments in flesh and spirit that produced abominations still wandering the land centuries later. The shattering, that cataclysmic event that players enter into, was not the beginning of the horror, but merely the moment when the carefully constructed lies of the Golden Order finally collapsed, allowing the ancient darkness to seep back into the world like poison through cracked stone. Every enemy you face, every boss that towers over you with impossible anatomy and unknowable purpose, every item description that hints at tragedies beyond measure, they are all breadcrumbs leading back to a series of cosmic violations that began before recorded history. The dragons that ruled the skies were not noble beasts, but living embodiments of an age when the world itself operated under different, harsher laws. The giants who tended the flame of ruin were not simply defeated in war, but subjected to a curse so profound that their god was imprisoned in the last survivor's body, forced to witness the extinction of his people through the eyes of the one giant Marika allowed to live. The merchants who once traveled the lands freely were buried alive en masse, their entire culture entombed beneath the earth for the crime of beckoning something the Golden Order feared, and in their mass grave they called out in their suffering to the Frenzied Flame, that manifestation of pure chaos and annihilation that promises to burn away all distinction, all meaning, all life itself. The rot that consumes Caelid is not merely a weapon of war gone wrong, but the physical manifestation of a forgotten outer god's influence, a scarlet cancer that transforms living beings into mindless vectors of contagion, that turns entire ecosystems into pulsing fungal nightmares, where the boundary between plant and animal and mineral dissolves into a singular, spreading corruption. The formless mother who whispers to Mohg in his blood-soaked palace beneath the earth is an entity of such alien consciousness that her very attention warps those who seek her favor into creatures that revel in exsanguination and pain. The deathbirds that circle ancient graveyards are remnants of an age when death was not the gentle return to the Erd Tree that the Golden Order promised, but something far more primal, far more final, and the deathrite birds that hunt at night are echoes of that older, truer understanding of mortality. Godwyn the Golden, first of the demigods to die, did not simply perish, but underwent a transformation so grotesque that his body became a spreading infection of undeath, his corpse growing like a tumor through the roots of the Erd tree itself, birthing those who live in death, beings trapped in a state between life and death that violates the natural order so fundamentally that they are hunted as abominations. The sorcerers of the Academy of Raya Lucaria did not merely study the stars, but communed with them, and in doing so, invited influences from the void between worlds, entities that regard human life with the same indifference we might show to bacteria, and their experiments in glintstone sorcery produced children born with stones for heads, living sacrifices to the pursuit of cosmic knowledge. Renala, once a mighty queen, was reduced to a catatonic shell endlessly cradling an amber egg, her mind shattered by abandonment, and the rebirth she offers is not true resurrection, but a grotesque recycling of souls, a perversion of life's natural cycle. The Albinaurics, artificial life forms created through some forgotten art, are born into suffering, their bodies degenerating over time, their very existence a testament to the hubris of those who would play at creation without understanding the consequences, and they are hunted and enslaved and slaughtered by those who see them as less than human, as failed experiments, as things rather than people. The misbegotten, beings born with animal features and treated as subhuman labor, carry in their very bodies the memory of the crucible, that primordial state of life when all things were blended together, when the boundaries between species were fluid, and their existence is a reminder that the Golden Order's obsession with purity and perfection is built on the suppression of nature's fundamental chaos. The Omen, children born with horns and cursed features, are either imprisoned in sewers beneath the capital or have their horns brutally excised in infancy, and Morgott, the Omen king who defended the very capital that rejected him, embodies the tragic irony of loyalty to a system that deems you monstrous from birth. Rykard, lord of blasphemy, fed himself to a god-devouring serpent and merged with it, becoming a writhing mass of flesh and scales that consumes champions and grows ever larger in the volcanic manner of Mat Gelmir, his ambition to devour the gods themselves, transforming him into something that can never be sated. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, is both a tragic figure and a walking apocalypse, her body ravaged by scarlet rot from birth, her devotion to her brother so absolute that she would rather bloom before the Erd tree cast its golden light across the lands between, before the greater will imposed its immaculate geometry upon the world. There existed something far older, far stranger, and infinitely more chaotic. In the most ancient past, in an era so distant it precedes all written history and all divine order, life itself emerged from what scholars and mystics would come to call the primordial crucible. This was not a place, not exactly, but rather a state of being, a churning, undifferentiated soup where all forms of life existed simultaneously in a single, unified whole. The crucible was everything and nothing, order and chaos intertwined so thoroughly that no distinction could be drawn between them. From this seething mass of potential, the first living things crawled forth, bearing within them the chaotic essence of their origin. The primordial crucible represents, in the most fundamental sense, the original form of what would eventually become the Erd tree itself. Long before the golden tree stood as a beacon of order and grace, before its roots drank deep of the land and its branches reached toward the heavens, there was only the crucible. The relationship between these two states of being is not one of simple transformation, but rather of suppression and refinement. The Erd Tree did not replace the crucible so much as it imposed structure upon chaos, forced singular identity upon multiplicity, and demanded purity where once there had been glorious, terrible amalgamation. The golden light that would come to define an age was, in truth, a veil drawn over something far more primal. Within this primordial era, among the various forces and entities that swirled through the chaos, one presence stands out for its particular influence on the nature of life itself. The formless mother, an outer god, whose very name speaks to her lack of fixed shape or singular identity, is intrinsically associated with the crucible and the primordial soup from which all things emerged. Unlike the greater will, which would later impose its rigid order upon the world, the formless mother embraced the fluid, ever-changing nature of the crucible. Her essence permeated the primordial soup, and through her influence, life took on qualities that would later be deemed monstrous, aberrant, and worthy of extermination. She is a deity of blood, not in the simple sense of violence or death, but in the deeper meaning of blood as the fundamental carrier of life, the medium through which existence flows and transforms. The formless mother's influence manifested in ways both wondrous and horrifying. From the crucible, under her watchful presence, emerged creatures that bore multiple limbs where 2 or 4 would suffice, beings with wings sprouting from unexpected places, entities whose bodies seemed to shift and change as though still caught in that primordial state of becoming. These were not mistakes or aberrations in the eyes of those ancient times. They were, instead, the truest expressions of life's infinite potential. The grotesque, by later standards, was once considered divine. The formless mother's touch brought with it not only physical transformation, but also a kind of madness, a breaking down of the barriers between self and other, between one form and another. To be touched by her power was to remember, on some deep cellular level, the time before individuation, before the cruel necessity of being only one thing. In those ancient days, there arose warriors who understood the power of the crucible and who sought to channel it directly into themselves. These were the Crucible Knights, an order of fighters whose very existence predates the establishment of the Erd Tree and the Golden Order by countless generations. The Crucible Knights did not merely fight in the name of the Crucible or worship it from afar. They drew its power into their very bodies, allowing the primordial chaos to reshape them in ways both magnificent and terrifying. Through their discipline and their willingness to embrace transformation, they manifested what came to be known as crucible aspects. These were not mere magical effects or temporary enhancements, but permanent alterations to their physical forms that granted them capabilities far beyond ordinary warriors. A crucible knight might sprout great wings from their back, not delicate or decorative, but powerful appendages capable of lifting an armored warrior into the air. Another might develop a thick, muscular tail that could sweep enemies from their feet or provide balance during complex maneuvers. Some grew horns that could gore opponents, while others developed scales that turned aside blades and arrows. These aspects were considered the highest form of blessing, tangible proof that the warrior had been touched by the divine chaos of the crucible itself. The Crucible Knights served as living testaments to the power of the primordial state, and in the age before the Erd Tree's dominance, they were revered as heroes and champions. Their armor, which can still be found scattered throughout the lands between, bears the distinctive aesthetic of that ancient time, ornate and heavy, designed to accommodate bodies that might at any moment sprout new appendages or undergo transformation. The aspects themselves, these physical manifestations of crucible power, were understood in that primordial age as signs of divine favor. To bear horns was to carry the strength of ancient beasts. To have scales was to wear armor granted by the crucible itself. Tails spoke of balance and primal grace, while wings represented transcendence and the breaking of earthly limitations. These were not curses or deformities, but marks of distinction, proof that one carried within them a greater portion of the crucible's infinite potential. Families would have celebrated the birth of a child bearing such aspects, and communities would have recognized such individuals as touched by forces greater than mortal understanding. The very concept of a pure or normal form had little meaning in an age when transformation and multiplicity were the natural state of all things. Yet the legacy of the Crucible did not end when the Golden Order rose to power. It could not end, for the Crucible's influence was woven into the very fabric of life itself. Throughout the long ages that followed, even as the Erd tree grew and the greater will imposed its vision of order upon the world, the Crucible's power continued to manifest. It appeared in beings known as the Omen, individuals born bearing horns, scales, and other physical characteristics that mark them as carriers of that ancient, primordial essence. But where once such features would have been celebrated, under the Golden Order they became signs of a curse, evidence of corruption and impurity. The Omen are, in the most literal sense, living links to the primordial crucible, their bodies expressing the same chaotic potential that once gave rise to all life. Their horns are not random growths or diseases, but direct manifestations of crucible aspects, the same power that the ancient crucible knights deliberately cultivated, now appearing unbidden in the general population. The treatment of the Omen under the Golden Order stands as one of the most brutal hypocrisies of that regime. These individuals, whose only crime is bearing physical evidence of the world's true nature, are subjected to horrific persecution. Omen born to common families are often killed outright, their horns sawed off in agonizing procedures that frequently result in death. Those who survive such mutilation are left scarred and broken, marked forever by the Golden Order's intolerance for anything that reminds it of the chaos it sought to suppress. Even Omen born to nobility are not spared, though their treatment takes a different form. They are imprisoned in elaborate underground sewers and catacombs, hidden away from sight so that polite society need not confront the evidence of the Crucible's enduring power. The subterranean shunning grounds beneath Leyndell, the capital city, serve as a vast prison for Omen, a place where those bearing the marks of the Crucible are cast into darkness and forgotten. The physical characteristics of the Omen are not random or arbitrary. Each horn, each scale, each unusual feature is a direct, albeit twisted by generations of suppression and fear, reflection of the Crucible's power. An Omen's horns might mirror those of ancient beasts that walked the earth when the world was young, or they might echo the aspects once proudly displayed by Crucible knights. The scales that cover portions of their skin are the same protective blessing that ancient warriors cultivated. The Golden Order sees only corruption and impurity, but those with knowledge of the ancient past recognize these features for what they truly are, vestiges of a time when life was not constrained by rigid categories and fixed forms, when transformation was not feared but embraced. The Formless Mother's influence extends beyond the mere physical manifestations of the Crucible. In ages far removed from the primordial past, her power would become central to the ambitions of the Mohgwyn dynasty, a blood-soaked regime that sought to establish a new order based on the very principles the Golden Order had tried to erase. Though the Mohgwyn dynasty itself is a relatively recent development in the vast span of the Lands Between's history, the Formless Mother's presence predates its formation by eons. She was ancient when the first Crucible Knights drew breath, and her desire for a dynasty of her own, for a lineage that would honor the fluid, transformative nature of blood and life, is merely the latest expression of an influence that has shaped the world since its beginning. The bloodflame incantations, spells that call upon the power of cursed blood to immolate enemies and spread corruption, are direct manifestations of the Formless Mother's power. These incantations do not draw upon the golden light of the Erd tree or the measured power of other divine sources. Instead, they tap into something far older, the same primordial force that flowed through the crucible when the world was young. The blood that fuels these spells is not merely a component or a sacrifice, but the very medium through which the Formless Mother's will is expressed. To cast a blood flame incantation is to momentarily return to that ancient state, to let the boundaries between self and other dissolve in a tide of crimson fire. The flames themselves burn with a color and intensity unlike ordinary fire, tinged with the deep red of arterial blood and carrying with them the scent of iron and transformation. The horns that mark the Omen as cursed in the eyes of the Golden Order are, in truth, anything but a curse in the original sense. They are vestiges of the Crucible's primordial power, physical anchors to an age when such features represented divine blessing rather than corruption. The Golden Order's insistence on viewing these horns as evidence of a curse reveals more about the Order's own fears and insecurities than it does about the true nature of the Omen. By declaring the Crucible's power heretical, by suppressing and persecuting those who bear its marks, the Golden Order attempts to rewrite history itself, to pretend that the chaotic, transformative nature of the Crucible never existed or that it was always evil. But the truth, written in the bodies of the Omen and in the surviving records of the Crucible Knights, cannot be so easily erased. The suppression of the Crucible's power by the Golden Order was not a sudden event, but a gradual process that unfolded over generations. As the Erd tree grew in power and influence, as the Greater Will's vision of perfect order took hold, the chaotic, transformative nature of the Crucible came to be seen as a threat to stability and purity. The Crucible Knights, once honored as heroes, found their legacy tarnished and their practices deemed heretical. The aspects they had cultivated, the wings and tails and horns that had marked them as blessed, were redefined as aberrations. New generations were taught to fear and despise the very things their ancestors had celebrated. The process was thorough and systematic, a deliberate campaign to reshape not just the present, but the past, to make it seem as though the Golden Order's vision of purity and singularity had always been the natural and correct state of the world. Yet despite centuries of suppression, despite the brutal persecution of the Omen and the vilification of the Crucible Knight's legacy, the power of that ancient era endures. Throughout the Lands Between, you can still encounter Crucible Knights, ancient warriors who have survived through the ages, their bodies still bearing the aspects they cultivated in that distant past. They stand as living proof that the Crucible's power cannot be fully suppressed, that the chaotic, transformative nature of primordial life remains woven into the fabric of existence. The Omen, too, continue to be born, generation after generation, their bodies expressing the same ancient power, despite all the Golden Order's efforts to eliminate it. They are not aberrations or mistakes, but rather the world's memory of its own origins, physical reminders that beneath the golden light and the imposed order lies something far older and far more fundamental. The formless mother's desire for a dynasty of her own, while a later development in the timeline of the lands between, represents a return to these primordial principles. Her vision is not of a rigid hierarchy or a fixed order, but of a realm where blood and transformation flow freely, where the boundaries between forms are fluid rather than fixed. This desire is not new or sudden, but rather the latest expression of an influence that has shaped life since the very beginning, since those first moments when existence emerged from the crucible's chaotic soup. The dynasty she seeks would be, in essence, a return to that primordial state, a rejection of the greater will's imposed order in favor of the infinite potential that existed before the Erd Tree's golden light began to shine. From the churning chaos of the primordial crucible, time moved forward into what we now call the ancient past, the era before the Erd Tree took root. This was the Age of Dragons, a time when the lands between knew a very different kind of order. Where the crucible had been formless potential, the ancient dragons brought structure, hierarchy, and a civilization built upon principles that predated the Golden Order by countless ages. The ancient dragons were not mere beasts. They were a sophisticated society, led by Placidusax, the Dragon Lord, whose very title speaks to the majesty and authority he commanded. Placidusax was no ordinary dragon. He served as Elden Lord during this primordial age, though the god he served was not the greater will that would later dominate the lands between. Instead, Placidusax pledged his loyalty to an outer god, whose identity remains shrouded in mystery, a deity that has long since fled or abandoned this realm. The exact nature of this god is unknown to us, lost to the erosion of time and the deliberate obscuring of history that followed the Golden Order's rise. What we do know is that this god's departure left Placidusax in a state of eternal waiting, a vigil that continues even now in ways we will explore. The ancient dragons established their seat of power in Farum Azula, a magnificent city that floated above the lands between, suspended in the sky through means that defy conventional understanding. Farum Azula was not simply a fortress or a palace. It was a monument to draconic civilization, filled with temples, arenas, and structures that demonstrated the dragon's mastery over both physical construction and metaphysical principles. The city existed in a strange relationship with time itself, operating according to rules that differed from the linear progression experienced in the lands below. This temporal anomaly would later allow Farum Azula to persist even after the dragon's fall, becoming a place where past and present blur together in ways that challenge mortal comprehension. The order that the ancient dragons imposed upon the lands between was fundamentally different from what would come later. Their system was tied intrinsically to the stars, to celestial movements and cosmic patterns that governed fate and destiny. The dragons practiced a unique form of magic, one that channeled the raw power of red lightning, a force distinct from the golden incantations that the Erd Tree would later inspire. This red lightning was not merely destructive. It represented a connection to primal forces, to the fundamental energies that existed before the greater will's influence reached the lands between. When an ancient dragon called down red lightning, They were drawing upon powers that predated organized religion, powers that came from the dragon's own inherent connection to the world's deepest currents. Interestingly, the ancient dragons maintained their own relationship with the primordial crucible, though their worship took a form distinct from the blood soaked reverence shown by followers of the formless mother. The dragons honored the crucible as the source of all life, the wellspring from which even they had emerged in ages past. Their veneration was not about chaos or formlessness, however. Instead, they sought to channel the crucible's creative power through structure and discipline, believing that true strength came from refining and perfecting the raw potential that the crucible represented. This philosophical approach manifested in their magic, their architecture, and their social hierarchy, all of which emphasized perfection, endurance, and the transcendence of mortal limitations. Among the ancient dragons, a practice existed that would later be adopted in corrupted form by humans. This was dragon communion, the act of consuming a dragon's heart to absorb its power and essence. Within draconic society, this practice carried profound ritualistic significance. When an ancient dragon fell in battle or reached the end of its natural span, other dragons would consume its heart in a ceremony that honored the deceased while ensuring that its strength and wisdom would not be lost. The power would flow into the living, preserving the accumulated might of generations. This was not seen as cannibalism or desecration, but as a sacred duty, a way of maintaining the collective strength of dragonkind across the ages. The practice required immense physical and spiritual fortitude. A dragon's heart contained not just raw power, but also the creature's memories, its knowledge, its very identity. To consume such a thing was to invite transformation, to risk being overwhelmed by the consciousness you absorbed. Among Placidusax's court, one dragon stood above all others as the Dragon Lord's greatest champion. This was Fortisax, an ancient dragon of such tremendous power that his name alone inspired awe and terror. Fortisax embodied everything the ancient dragons valued. His mastery of red lightning was unparalleled, capable of splitting the very sky with his fury. His scales were said to be harder than any metal forged by mortal hands, and his wings could generate storms with their beating. But Fortisax was more than simply a weapon of war. He represented the pinnacle of draconic philosophy, combining raw strength with strategic brilliance and an unwavering loyalty to Placidusax and the order they had built. Fortisax served not just as a warrior, but as a symbol, living proof that the dragon's way of life produced beings of godlike capability. For an age beyond mortal reckoning, the ancient dragons reigned supreme over the lands between. Their rule was not necessarily benevolent, but it was stable, predictable, ordered according to principles that had been established long ago and were not subject to the whims of mortal ambition or divine caprice. The lesser creatures of the world, the humans and giants, and other races that inhabited the lands, lived under draconic dominion, some serving the dragons directly while others simply avoided drawing their attention. It was a time when the sky belonged to wings and scales, when the red lightning of the ancient dragons was the ultimate expression of power. But nothing lasts forever, not even the reign of dragons. The primordial crucible, that wellspring of all life and potential, began to manifest something new. From its depths, a great tree began to grow. This was the Erd tree, and its emergence would change everything. The Erd tree did not simply appear overnight. Its growth was gradual but inexorable, its roots spreading deep into the earth, while its branches reached toward the heavens that had once been the dragon's exclusive domain. The tree glowed with golden light, a radiance that stood in stark contrast to the red lightning and starlit skies that had defined the previous age. More importantly, the Erd tree brought with it a new god, or rather, it served as the vessel for a new god's influence. The Greater Will, an outer god of immense power, began to exert its authority over the lands between through the Erd tree, establishing what would become known as the Golden Order. The Golden Order represented a direct challenge to everything the ancient dragons had built. Where the dragons drew their authority from ancient tradition and cosmic principles tied to the stars, the Golden Order claimed divine mandate from the Greater Will itself. Where draconic rule had been based on strength and hierarchy, the Golden Order promised a more structured system of laws and blessings distributed through the Erd tree's grace. The two systems were fundamentally incompatible, and conflict became inevitable. Into this brewing storm stepped Godfrey, a warrior of such exceptional prowess that he would become the first Elden Lord of the Golden Order. Godfrey was not born to greatness. He was a chieftain, a leader of a tribe of warriors known for their ferocity in battle. But Godfrey possessed something that set him apart, a combination of martial skill, tactical genius, and sheer force of will that caught the attention of Queen Marika the Eternal, the vessel through which the Greater Will enacted its designs. Marika saw in Godfrey the instrument through which the Golden Order could be established by force, the champion who could break the ancient dragon's hold on the lands between. She elevated him, granting him power and authority, making him her consort and the first to bear the title of Elden Lord under the new order. Godfrey did not face this monumental task alone. He gathered around him an army, warriors who would become known as the Tarnished in later ages, though at this time they were simply soldiers of the Golden Order, fighting to establish their god's supremacy. These forces were blessed with the grace of the Erd tree, a golden light that enhanced their strength and guided their actions. With this army at his command, Godfrey launched a campaign against the ancient dragons, beginning what history would remember as the Dragon War. The Dragon War was not a brief conflict. It stretched across years, perhaps decades, a grinding struggle between two fundamentally opposed visions of how the lands between should be ordered. The dragons possessed advantages that seemed insurmountable. They could fly, raining destruction from above, while remaining beyond the reach of ground-based forces. Their scales turned aside most weapons. Their red lightning could annihilate entire battalions in moments. And they had Farum Azula, a fortress that could not be easily besieged or even reliably located, as it drifted through the sky according to patterns known only to the dragons themselves. But Godfrey and his forces had advantages of their own. The grace of the Erd tree granted them resilience and strength beyond normal human limits. They had numbers, able to replace losses in ways the long-lived but slowly reproducing dragons could not. And they had Godfrey himself, a warrior whose personal power rivaled that of the dragons he fought. Godfrey developed tactics specifically designed to counter draconic advantages, using terrain to limit the dragon's mobility, employing weapons and incantations blessed by the Erd tree that could pierce even ancient scales, and most importantly, targeting the dragon's pride, drawing them into single combat where his own legendary strength could be brought to bear. Not all dragons were united in their opposition to the Golden Order. Lanceax, a female ancient dragon of considerable power, found herself drawn to one of Godfrey's knights, a warrior of exceptional skill and honor. The exact nature of their relationship remains debated by scholars, But what is clear is that Lansaic saw in this night, and perhaps in the Golden Order itself, something worth preserving. She attempted to serve as a bridge between the two sides, teaching her knight the ways of draconic magic, sharing the secrets of red lightning with one who served the Erd Tree. This was an act of tremendous significance, a blurring of the boundaries that had seemed so absolute. Lansaiac's actions suggested that perhaps the two orders need not be completely incompatible, that some synthesis might be possible. Her efforts, however noble, could not prevent the war's escalation. The conflict reached its apex in a legendary confrontation between Fortisax, the greatest of the ancient dragons, and Godfrey, the champion of the Golden Order. The details of this duel have been embellished and mythologized over the ages, but certain facts remain clear. The two met in single combat, dragon against warrior, red lightning against golden strength. The battle raged for an entire day and night, or so the legends claim, with neither able to gain a decisive advantage. Fortisax unleashed the full fury of draconic power, calling down storms of red lightning that scarred the earth and split mountains. Godfrey weathered this onslaught through sheer endurance and skill, closing the distance again and again, landing blows that would have killed any lesser creature. The duel ended not with a clear victor, but with mutual recognition. Both Fortisax and Godfrey understood that they had met their equal, that neither could truly defeat the other without destroying themselves in the process. This realization, more than any military victory, marked the turning point of the Dragon War. If even Fortisax, the mightiest of dragons, could not overcome Godfrey, then the ancient dragon's supremacy was no longer absolute. The war continued, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. Gradually, inexorably, the ancient dragons were pushed back. Farum Azula became isolated, cut off from the lands below as more and more territory fell under the Golden Order's control. Some dragons submitted, accepting subordinate positions in the new hierarchy. Others fled to remote regions, hiding in mountains and ruins where the Golden Order's reach was limited. A few, the most proud and powerful, retreated to Farum Azula itself, withdrawing into their timeless city rather than bend the knee to the Erd Tree. Placidusax, the Dragon Lord, faced a choice that no ruler should have to make. His god had already abandoned him, departing for reasons unknown. Now his civilization was crumbling, his people scattered or subjugated. He could have fought to the bitter end, could have led his remaining dragons in a final apocalyptic battle that might have destroyed both sides. Instead, Placidusax made a different choice. He retreated to the heart of Farum Azula, to a place where time itself behaved strangely, where past and present existed simultaneously. There, in the eye of a perpetual storm, Placidusax entered a state of waiting, a vigil that transcends normal existence. He waits still, even now, for the return of his god, existing in a moment before the Erd Tree, before the fall, before everything changed. His body remains, multiple heads removed by battles long past, yet still he endures, dreaming of a time when his god might return and restore the order that was lost. The Age of Dragons did not end with a single decisive battle or a clear moment of defeat. Instead, it faded, gradually supplanted by the Golden Order's rise. The ancient dragon's reign, which had seemed eternal and unshakable, proved to be just another phase in the lands between's long and turbulent history, one more civilization that rose to greatness only to be overcome by forces it could not ultimately resist. The dragon's dominion would eventually wane, but long before the Erd Tree cast its golden light across the realm, another power smoldered in the frozen peaks of the world. We move now into the ancient past, the era of the giants, a time when the mountain tops of the giants harbored a deity whose very existence threatened to consume all life in flame. In the highest reaches of the lands between, where snow fell eternally and the air itself seemed to burn with cold, there existed a god of pure destruction. The Fell God, an ancient and malevolent deity, manifested not as a being of flesh or stone, but as a raging fire within the mountain tops of the giants. This was no ordinary flame. The Fell God's essence was woven into a conflagration that defied natural law, a fire that burned with terrible sentience and hunger. Unlike the dragons, who claimed dominion through strength and ancient right, the Fell God simply was, a primordial force of annihilation that predated order itself. Its flames were said to possess a will, a malice that sought not merely to consume, but to unmake, to reduce all things to ash and memory. The fire giants, a race of colossal beings, worshipped the Fell God with a devotion that bordered on symbiosis. These were not mere mortals who had grown large. The giants were a distinct species, towering figures whose bodies were built to withstand extremes that would obliterate lesser creatures. Their skin bore the ruddy hue of embers, and their eyes reflected the eternal flame they tended. To call them worshippers understates the relationship. The giants were the Fell God's attendants, its priests and its warriors, bound to the deity through generations of service that stretched back beyond recorded history. They did not simply pray to their god. They fed it, nurtured it, and in return drew from it a power that made them among the most fearsome beings to walk the earth. Their existence was marked by a constant, smoldering threat to the lands between, fueled by their devotion to the Fell God. The giants did not seek conquest in the manner of ambitious kings or hungry empires. Their threat was more fundamental. The Fell God's flame was not content to remain confined. It yearned to spread, to cascade down from the mountain tops and sweep across the lowlands, transforming the world into a charred wasteland. The giant's very presence meant that this catastrophe loomed as an ever-present possibility. Every ritual they performed, every prayer they offered, every sacrifice they made to strengthen their god brought the lands between closer to an apocalypse of fire. The smoke from their sacred flames could be seen from leagues away, a dark pillar rising into the sky, a warning and a promise. The fire giants possessed the power to manipulate the destructive flames of their god, making them formidable foes beyond measure. This was not simple pyromancy of the sort that human sorcerers might study and master. The flames the giants wielded were fragments of the Fell God itself, imbued with that same terrible will. A giant could summon pillars of fire that melted stone, could breathe gouts of flame that incinerated entire battalions, could cause the very ground to erupt in volcanic fury. Their weapons, massive implements forged in the heart of their sacred fires, burned with perpetual heat. To face a fire giant in battle was to confront not just a physical opponent, but a conduit of divine wrath. Stories from this era, preserved in fragments and whispers, speak of lowland settlements that ventured too close to the mountain tops, only to be reduced to glass and slag in moments. The giants did not need to march to war. The fire came to those who threatened their domain. The giants' civilization flourished in the mountain tops, centered around the worship and tending of the Fell God's flame. Their settlements were carved into the peaks themselves, great halls of stone that could withstand the constant heat radiating from their sacred sites. The architecture of the giants reflected their dual nature, structures that were both fortresses and temples. At the heart of their civilization stood the flame of ruin, the physical manifestation of the fell god's presence in the world. This was not merely a large fire. The flame of ruin was a furnace of cosmic proportion, a roaring inferno that burned in a great forge cauldron, tended day and night by the giants. The flame never diminished, never required fuel in any conventional sense. It simply existed, fed by the fell god's essence and the giants' devotion. Around this flame, the giants built their culture. They forged their weapons in its heat, conducted their most sacred ceremonies in its presence, and raised their young to understand that their purpose, their very reason for existence, was to ensure the flame never died. But the age of the giants could not last forever. Change was coming to the lands between, change in the form of a golden tree and the god who would claim dominion over all. Queen Marika the Eternal, in her early reign, launched a campaign to unify the lands between under the Erd tree's influence. Marika was not content with ruling a single kingdom or commanding the loyalty of a scattered people. Her vision was absolute. The Erd tree, that great golden beacon that had emerged to challenge the old order, would be the center of a new world. Under its boughs, all beings would live according to the golden order, a cosmic law that Marika herself would define and enforce. This was not presented as tyranny, but as salvation, a bringing of light and structure to a realm that had known only chaos and the rule of ancient, inhuman powers. Marika's early campaigns targeted those forces that stood in opposition to this vision, the remnants of the dragon cults, the practitioners of forbidden sorceries, the worshippers of outer gods, whose influence corrupted and destroyed. Marika viewed the fire giants and their fell god as a direct threat to the nascent Erd tree and its golden order. This was not paranoia or the jealousy of one god toward another. The threat was existential and immediate. The fell god's flame was antithetical to the Erd tree's golden light. Where the Erd tree promised eternal life through its blessings, the fell god offered only destruction. Where the golden order sought to impose structure and meaning, the fell god embodied primordial chaos. More practically, the flame of ruin possessed the power to burn the Erd tree itself. This was perhaps the most terrifying truth that Marika's seers and prophets uncovered. The fell god's fire was one of the few forces in existence capable of reducing the Erd tree to ash, of undoing everything Marika had built. As long as the giants tended their flame, as long as the fell god smoldered in the mountain tops, Marika's golden order could never be secure. So Marika waged a brutal war against them, leading her forces, including Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, into the mountain tops. Godfrey, who had proven himself the mightiest warrior in the lands between, who had conquered countless foes and bent them to Marika's will, now turned his attention to the frozen peaks. He led an army unlike any the world had seen, warriors blessed by the Erd tree, knights who fought with golden incantations, soldiers who believed utterly in their queen's divine right to rule. But even this formidable host faced a daunting task. The mountain tops were the giants' domain, a landscape they knew intimately, where the cold alone could kill unprepared invaders. And the giants themselves, each one a living siege engine, defended their homeland with the fury of beings fighting, not just for territory, but for their very purpose in existence. The war was characterized by immense destruction, as Marika sought to extinguish the fell god and its followers. The battles that raged across the mountaintops were cataclysmic. Entire mountainsides collapsed under the weight of giant corpses. Valleys were filled with the bodies of Marika's soldiers, frozen in death or burned beyond recognition. The giants fought with desperate ferocity, calling down pillars of fire that melted armor and flesh alike, wielding weapons that could crush a dozen men with a single blow. Godfrey himself engaged the mightiest of the giants in single combat, duels that shook the earth and lasted for days. The sky above the mountain tops was perpetually dark with smoke and ash. The snow itself turned black from the soot of countless fires. This was not a war of maneuver and strategy. It was annihilation, a grinding campaign of extermination where Marika's forces slowly, inexorably, pushed the giants back toward their sacred flame. The Golden Order's troops employed tactics specifically designed to counter the giants' advantages. Sorcerers worked to create barriers against flame. Priests called upon the Erd Tree's blessings to shield soldiers from the worst of the heat, and engineers constructed siege weapons capable of striking giants from distances that kept the soldiers relatively safe. But the cost was staggering. For every giant that fell, hundreds of Marika's warriors perished. The war dragged on for years, perhaps decades, a constant grinding conflict that consumed resources and lives at a rate that would have broken lesser rulers. But Marika was not a lesser ruler. She was eternal, patient, and absolutely committed to her vision. She would accept no outcome but total victory. Marika's forces nearly exterminated the fire giants, with many perishing in the conflict. The end came slowly, then all at once. As the giants' numbers dwindled, as their greatest warriors fell to Godfrey's might and Marika's sorceries, the survivors retreated to their most sacred sites, making their final stands around the Flame of Ruin itself. The last battles were the most terrible, fought in the very heart of the giants' civilization, where the heat was so intense that even blessed armor offered little protection. Here, the giants made Marika's army pay for every foot of ground in blood and agony. But they could not prevail. One by one, the giants fell. Their great halls were toppled, their forges extinguished, their sacred sites desecrated. The race that had tended the fell god's flame since time immemorial was brought to the edge of extinction. The mountain tops, once alive with the giants' presence, became a graveyard, a frozen wasteland littered with enormous corpses that would never decay, preserved forever by the eternal cold. Marika decreed that the fell god's flame must never be allowed to spread again, sealing it away. Victory in battle was not enough. The flame of ruin still burned, and as long as it existed, the threat remained. Marika could not simply extinguish the flame, for it was a god, and gods do not die so easily. Instead, she chose containment, a prison of ritual and decree. She commanded her most powerful sorcerers and priests to weave enchantments around the flame of ruin, bindings that would prevent its spread, that would lock it in place and deny it the ability to grow or consume. These were not simple spells, but fundamental alterations to the nature of reality in that place, laws written into the fabric of the world itself. The flame would burn, but it would burn only where Marika allowed, in a forge prison of her design. But Marika's cruelty, or perhaps her pragmatism, extended further still. The last giant, a colossal and ancient being, was spared by Marika, but cursed to eternally tend the flame of ruin. This was not mercy. The last giant, possibly the oldest of his kind, the keeper of his people's history and traditions, was condemned to a fate worse than death. He was bound by Marika's decree, chains not of metal, but of divine command, forced to remain in the presence of his god and continue the ancient duty of his people. But now he did so not in worship, but in imprisonment. He would tend the flame, feed it, maintain it, ensure it never went out, but he would do so alone, the last of his kind, surrounded by the bones of his people for all eternity. Every moment of his existence would be a reminder of his race's destruction, of everything he had lost. This imprisoned giant, bound by Marika's decree, continues to tend the flame, a living sacrifice to prevent its resurgence. The cruelty of this arrangement reveals much about Marika's nature and the foundations of the Golden Order. She understood that the fell god could not be truly killed, that the flame of ruin was too fundamental a force to be erased. So she transformed it into a tool, a weapon held in reserve. The last giant's eternal servitude ensured that the flame would never die completely, but neither would it ever threaten the Erdtree again. It would burn in its prison, tended by its last worshipper, a monument to Marika's power and a warning to any who might challenge the Golden Order. The giant's suffering, his loneliness, and despair were simply the price of security, a cost Marika was willing to exact. The scar of the giant's war and the lingering presence of the fell god's flame remained a dark secret of the Erdtree's past. In the ages that followed, as the Golden Order spread its influence across the lands between, the truth of what happened in the mountaintops was carefully obscured. The war against the giants was remembered, if at all, as a necessary campaign against monsters, a righteous crusade to protect civilization from destruction. The fell god was reduced to a footnote, an ancient evil defeated by Marika's wisdom and strength. Few knew that the flame still burned, that the last giant still lived, that the threat had never truly been eliminated, but merely contained. This was the foundation upon which the Golden Order was built, not just golden light and divine blessing, but also genocide, imprisonment, and the ruthless elimination of anything that stood in opposition to Marika's vision. The mountaintops of the giants became a forbidden place, a frozen wasteland that few dared to visit, where the wind howled through empty halls and the bones of giants lay scattered like monuments to a forgotten age. And deep within those peaks, in a forge prison sealed by divine decree, the flame of ruin burned on, tended by a creature whose existence was suffering, waiting for the day when someone might break Marika's seals and unleash the fell god's wrath once more. Previous section ends, a stark contrast to the ordered world that would soon arrive. It was in this ancient past, long before the familiar shape of the Erdtree dominated the horizon, that the very fabric of the lands between began its radical transformation. This era marks the insidious arrival of the Greater Will, an outer god, a cosmic entity of immense power and inscrutable intent. Unlike the indigenous powers and primordial forces that had shaped the lands between for millennia, the Greater Will was an extraterrestrial influence, a celestial invader extending its tendrils across the vast expanse of the cosmos, seeking to establish its dominion over new worlds. Its ambition was not merely to coexist, but to impose a singular, unyielding order, a grand design that would subsume all existing forms of life and belief under its golden banner. The lands between, fertile with nascent life and untamed magic, presented itself as a prime target for this cosmic colonization. To achieve this profound imposition, the Greater Will did not arrive directly, at least not in any corporeal form that mortals could comprehend. Instead, it dispatched its most potent and direct emissary, a living embodiment of its power, a construct of pure divine will, the Elden Beast. This colossal entity, often described as a star-faring creature, was not merely a messenger, but a physical manifestation of the Elden Ring itself, the very source code of the Greater Will's cosmic order. Imagine, if you will, a fragment of a distant alien star, imbued with consciousness and purpose, hurtling through the void. The Elden Beast descended from the stars, a spectacular and terrifying celestial event, crashing into the lands between with cataclysmic force. This impact was not merely a destructive act, it was the genesis, the violent birth pangs, of what would become the Golden Order. The site of its landing, now known as the Erd Tree's roots, became the epicenter of a new era, radiating the greater will's influence outwards like an expanding golden ripple across the land. This initial descent was a declaration, a cosmic pronouncement that the old ways were to be swept aside and a new, divinely ordained epic was to begin. Before the full imposition of the greater will, the lands between was home to a vibrant, chaotic, and wonderfully diverse ecosystem of life and death, embodied by what is known as the crucible of life. This primordial form of the Erd Tree was not a singular, towering golden structure, but a diffuse, interconnected web of life, a melting pot where all forms of existence intermingled and mutated freely. It was a place of raw, untamed creation, where the boundaries between species were fluid and the very essence of life flowed without rigid definition. Horns, wings, scales, and tails were not aberrations, but natural expressions of this primal vitality, remnants of which can still be seen in certain creatures and even some of the demigods. The crucible represented a time of natural, uninhibited evolution, a testament to the lands between's inherent magical potency. It was a world where diverse forms of life, from the lowly beastmen to the nascent giants, thrived in a complex, often brutal, but ultimately self-regulating balance. This organic, chaotic growth stood in stark contrast to the rigid, singular vision of the greater will. As the Elden Beast established its presence, the greater will's influence began its systematic and relentless suppression of the crucible's chaotic, diverse forms of life. The cosmic entity, driven by its desire for a singular, predictable order, viewed the crucible's inherent fluidity and wildness as an imperfection, a deviation from its grand design. The natural intermingling of life, the spontaneous mutations, and the lack of a clear hierarchy were anathema to the greater will's desire for control. Slowly but inexorably, the raw, untamed energy of the crucible was channeled, refined, and ultimately stifled. The greater will favored a more singular, defined, and ultimately more controllable order. This was not a sudden, violent purge, but a gradual, insidious reshaping, a subtle but profound shift in the very essence of life within the lands between. The diverse expressions of the crucible, once celebrated, became viewed as archaic, even monstrous, aberrations that needed to be pruned or eliminated in favor of a more pure and standardized form of existence. This suppression laid the groundwork for the Golden Order's aesthetic and philosophical foundations, where uniformity and adherence to a prescribed form were paramount. To serve as its earthly anchor and enforcer, the greater will chose a vessel, a mortal being through whom its divine will could be made manifest in the lands between. This chosen individual was Queen Marika the Eternal, a Numen. The Numen were a mysterious, ancient race, often depicted as having elongated features and an inherent connection to the divine, suggesting they might have been subtly influenced or even engineered by outer gods long before the greater will's direct intervention. Marika, however, was chosen specifically for her strength, her ambition, and perhaps her malleable will, making her the perfect conduit for the greater will's cosmic ambition. Her elevation was not merely a coronation, it was a profound spiritual and physical transformation. She became intrinsically linked to the Elden Ring, its power flowing through her, making her the central figure in the establishment of the new divine order. Her role was to translate the greater will's abstract cosmic dictates into tangible laws, structures, and beliefs that could govern the inhabitants of the lands between. She was to be the architect of a new civilization built upon the tenets of the arriving deity. With the immense power of the Elden Beast at her command, and acting as the direct conduit for the greater will's cosmic directives, Queen Marika began to reshape the lands between according to its will. This was a monumental undertaking, a complete overhaul of the existing spiritual, political, and even physical landscape. Her reign marked the beginning of a deliberate and systematic effort to erase the old ways and implant the new. She was not merely a queen, she was a divine instrument, her every action imbued with the authority of an outer god. This reshaping involved not only the establishment of new laws and religious doctrines, but also the literal alteration of the land itself. The very essence of the lands between, once wild and untamed, was brought under a strict golden discipline. Marika, guided by the greater will, began to manifest its vision of a perfectly ordered world, a world where chaos was banished and divine law reigned supreme. The most prominent and an enduring symbol of this new order and the physical manifestation of the greater will's dominion was the Erd tree. This colossal tree of gold, growing from the very spot where the Elden Beast had initially crashed, began its ascent, dominating the landscape with its immense size and radiant golden glow. The Erd tree was not merely a tree, it was a living, breathing monument to the greater will's power, a central pillar of its cosmic order. It drew all life and death into its cycle, becoming the ultimate arbiter of existence within the lands between. This was a direct replacement for the crucible of life. Where the crucible had been a diffuse, chaotic, and diverse melting pot, the Erd tree was singular, majestic, and rigidly structured. Its golden leaves and branches symbolized the greater will's pervasive influence, touching every corner of the land. The Erd tree became the source of all grace, the destination for all souls, and the ultimate symbol of the Golden Order's supremacy. Its growth was a testament to the successful imposition of the greater will's will, a physical embodiment of its triumph over the primordial chaos. With the Erd tree towering over the lands between, the Golden Order was formally established. Queen Marika, now revered as an eternal deity, stood at its apex, enforcing the greater will's tenets across the entire land. This was a comprehensive religious, political, and social system designed to integrate every aspect of life under the greater will's banner. The Golden Order dictated not only spiritual beliefs, but also societal structures, legal codes, and even artistic expression. Its principles emphasized order, stability, and adherence to divine law. Marika, as its eternal queen, became the embodiment of these ideals, her reign characterized by a meticulous and unwavering dedication to the greater will's vision. Temples were erected in its honor, scriptures were written to propagate its doctrines, and a vast bureaucracy was established to ensure its laws were observed. The Golden Order was not merely a religion, it was a totalizing ideology, aiming to create a perfect, harmonious society under the benevolent, or perhaps tyrannical, gaze of the greater will. One of the most profound and far-reaching changes enacted by Marika and the Golden Order was the sealing away of the concept of destined death. Before the Golden Order, death was a natural and irreversible part of the cycle of life, a finality that allowed for new beginnings and the natural progression of existence. However, the Greater Will, through Marika, sought to impose a different kind of cycle, one that would prevent true death and create a continuous process of rebirth within the Erd Tree. Destined Death, the rune that governed the absolute finality of life, was removed from the Elden Ring and sealed away by Malekith, Marika's shadow-bound beast. This act had monumental consequences. It meant that no one truly died in the lands between. Instead, their souls returned to the Erd Tree, where they were eventually reborn. This created a stagnant, unending cycle, preventing the natural progression of life and death, and trapping all beings within the Greater Will's eternal dominion. While seemingly benevolent, offering eternal life, it effectively removed agency and the natural conclusion of existence, binding all souls to the Erd Tree's will. This effectively created an immortal society, but one where true change and ultimate release were impossible, a subtle but profound form of control. With Marika firmly established as the Eternal Queen and the Golden Order flourishing, the Greater Will's earthly power structure was further solidified through the emergence of the golden lineage of demigods. These powerful beings were born from Marika's unions, most notably with Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Godfrey, a fierce warrior chosen for his strength and leadership, became Marika's consort, and together they produced a formidable progeny. These demigods, infused with the divine essence of the Elden Ring through their mother, possessed immense power and became the pillars of the Golden Order's authority. They were not merely royal offspring, they were living symbols of the Greater Will's dominion, their very existence a testament to its pervasive influence. Each demigod, in time, would come to rule vast territories, commanding armies and enforcing the Golden Order's laws, extending the reach of Marika's reign and the Greater Will's power across the entire lands between. Their birth cemented a hierarchical structure, with the demigods at the apex, ensuring the continued rule of the Golden Order for generations to come. The rise of the Golden Order was not without conflict. The lands between had its own ancient powers and established rulers, and the Greater Will's imposition meant a clash of civilizations. One of the most significant challenges came from the ancient dragons, once the dominant species of the lands between, led by the venerable dragon lord Placidusax. Before the Erd Tree, the dragons ruled from their capital, Farum Azula, a city that defied time itself. They were beings of immense power, wielding lightning and fire, and their dominion stretched across the land. However, with the advent of the Golden Order, their era of dominance was destined to end. Godfrey, Marika's formidable husband and the first Elden Lord, led the charge against the dragons. His legendary strength and the overwhelming force of the nascent Golden Order proved too much for the ancient beasts. Many dragons were defeated in brutal battles, their might broken by the Golden Order's relentless advance. Others, recognizing the futility of resistance, were subjugated, forced to swear fealty to the new order, their ancient power now serving the Greater Will. The most prominent example of this subjugation is Fortisax, who became a loyal ally to Godwyn the Golden. This conquest marked a definitive end to the dragon's long reign, firmly establishing the Golden Order as the supreme power in the lands between and demonstrating its capacity for overwhelming military might. Another ancient and powerful force that stood in the way of the Golden Order's complete supremacy were the giants, guardians of the Fell God. These colossal beings, residing in the icy peaks of the mountain tops of the giants, worshipped a primordial fire god, a deity antithetical to the golden light of the Erd tree. Their very existence and their devotion to an opposing outer god was an affront to the greater will's singular vision. A brutal and devastating war ensued, led by Marika herself and her mighty consort Godfrey. This conflict was a testament to the Golden Order's ruthlessness and its unwavering commitment to eradicating any challenge to its authority. The giants, despite their immense size and strength, were largely annihilated. Their civilization was shattered, their warriors slain, and their fell god sealed away, its flame extinguished, though not completely, as history would later reveal. The sole surviving giant, condemned to forever tend the flame, stands as a grim reminder of the Golden Order's devastating power and its willingness to commit genocide to cement its supremacy. This victory over the giants further solidified the Golden Order's control, removing one of the last major obstacles to its complete dominance over the lands between. The war was not merely a military conquest, but a spiritual one, the suppression of a rival deity and its followers. With the ancient powers subdued and the land largely purged of overt opposition, the Golden Order's influence spread far and wide, a golden tide washing over the lands between. This expansion was not always through direct conquest. Often, it involved a process of conversion, assimilation, or subtle cultural subjugation. Various peoples and cultures, from the inhabitants of Limgrave to the scholars of Raya Lucaria, found themselves drawn into the orbit of the Erd tree. Some embraced the Golden Order willingly, seeing its promise of stability, grace, and eternal life as a benevolent gift. Others were conquered, their traditions and beliefs gradually eroded and replaced by the tenets of the greater will. The Golden Order established its presence through the construction of grand cathedrals, the promulgation of its unique incantations and miracles, and the establishment of its knightly orders. A new era dawned, one bathed in the Erd tree's golden glow, where the greater will's influence was pervasive, its laws absolute, and its queen, Marika, held sway over all life and death. The lands between, once a tapestry of diverse beliefs and untamed wilderness, was now unified under a singular golden banner, a testament to the overwhelming power and insidious reach of the outer god from beyond the stars. This period marked the zenith of the greater will's direct control, a time of apparent peace and prosperity, but one built upon suppression, conquest, and the fundamental alteration of the very nature of existence. And so, as the age of the Erd Tree dawned, a new chapter, one of profound control and unsettling stability, began to unfold across the lands between. This era, dominated by the Golden Order, saw a radical redefinition of life and death itself, a redefinition that would ultimately sow the seeds of its own destruction. At the very heart of this transformation was Marika the Eternal, the enigmatic goddess who would become the central figure of the Golden Order. In an act of unparalleled cosmic surgery, Marika removed the rune of death from the Elden Ring, the very embodiment of the Golden Order's power and the fundamental laws of the world. This wasn't merely a political maneuver, but a metaphysical one, fundamentally altering the fabric of existence. Death, as it had been known, a natural and inevitable conclusion to life, became a controlled phenomenon, a faucet turned off at the whim of a deity. The raw, untamed power of destined death, the true end of all things, was stripped away, leaving behind a world where mortality was no longer absolute. To safeguard this momentous alteration, Marika entrusted the Rune of Death to her shadow, Malekith, the Black Blade. A shadow, in the context of the lands between, is a beast given to an Empyrean, a chosen individual destined to become a god, serving as their loyal companion and protector. Malekith, a formidable warrior of immense power, sealed the Rune of Death within his very blade, the destined death. This act transformed him into the death-keeping beast, forever bound to prevent its release. His loyalty to Marika was absolute, his burden immense, for he became the sole custodian of true mortality, a living prison for the ultimate end. The consequences of this act were immediate and far-reaching. With the Rune of Death contained, those who died in the lands between were no longer truly gone. Instead, their souls, their very essence, were absorbed into the Erd Tree, the colossal golden tree that stood as the symbol and source of the Golden Order's power. Their spirits returned to its roots, a vast subterranean network that permeated the entire land. This created a peculiar and, in hindsight, deeply unsettling form of immortality. It was a false immortality, a perpetual cycle of absorption and return where true, irreversible death was impossible. The natural progression of life and death, the ebb and flow that defines existence, was replaced by a stagnant, unyielding cycle. The world became a gilded cage, where the illusion of eternal life masked a profound absence of genuine change and renewal. The implications for evolution, for the very concept of progress, were staggering. Without the finality of death, without the space it creates for new life, the lands between became trapped in an endless, unchanging present. To solidify this new reality, the Golden Order established the Erd Tree burial as the sole acceptable method for the deceased. This elaborate ritual ensured that the souls of the departed were properly channeled back into the Erd Tree, reinforcing its power and maintaining the established order. Any deviation, any practice that suggested an alternative fate for the deceased was deemed heretical and suppressed. The Erd Tree became not just a symbol, but a literal processing plant for souls, a cosmic recycling center designed to maintain the status quo. This rigid enforcement of funerary practices was a powerful tool of control, ensuring that even in death, individuals remained within the grasp of the Golden Order. The very act of mourning and remembrance was reshaped to serve the Erd Tree's dominance, a constant reminder of its absolute authority over life and its supposed end. This unwavering commitment to its own tenets led the Golden Order to actively suppress anything that deviated from its doctrines. This included the worship of other outer gods, cosmic entities whose influence extended beyond the lands between, and ancient beliefs that predated the Erd Tree's rise. The Golden Order was not merely a religion, it was an ideology, a totalitarian worldview that demanded absolute conformity. Any alternative spiritual path, any whisper of a different cosmic truth, was seen as a threat to its absolute authority. This suppression manifested in various forms, from the eradication of ancient shrines to the persecutions of those who clung to older traditions. The Golden Order sought to erase history, to rewrite the narrative of the lands between to begin and end with itself. One of the most tragic consequences of this ideological purity was the persecution of the Crucible. The Crucible, in its primordial form, was the very origin of the Erd Tree, a chaotic and vibrant amalgamation of life that existed before the Golden Order imposed its rigid structure. It was a time of raw, untamed power, where life burst forth in myriad forms, some beautiful, others grotesque by later standards. The vestiges of this primordial era, such as the omens, individuals born with horns, or other physical manifestations of the crucible's untamed power, were deemed heretical and anathema to the Golden Order's aesthetic of perfection. Omens, despite being direct descendants of the Erd tree's earliest forms, were persecuted, reviled, and often hidden away in subterranean prisons like the subterranean shunning grounds beneath the capital Leyndell. They were seen as blemishes, as proof of a less perfect past that the Golden Order desperately wished to forget. This persecution highlights the Golden Order's deep-seated insecurity, its need to sanitize its own origins and present a facade of flawless divinity. Even its own ancestral roots were deemed impure if they did not conform to its carefully constructed image. The Golden Order's expansionist tendencies were not limited to ideological cleansing. They also involved aggressive military campaigns against established civilizations. One of the most significant of these conflicts was the war against the fire giants. These colossal beings, inhabitants of the mountaintops of the giants, worshipped the Fell God, a powerful deity of fire and destruction. The Golden Order, with its emphasis on golden light and order, saw the fire giants and their fiery god as an antithesis, a direct challenge to its dominion. The war was brutal and protracted, a clash of titans that reshaped the very landscape. Ultimately, the Golden Order, under the leadership of Godfrey, Marika's consort and the first Elden Lord, emerged victorious. The fire giants were largely eradicated, their civilization shattered, and their fell god was sealed away within the mountain tops of the giants, its flame perpetually burning, a constant reminder of the Golden Order's triumph and the immense power it wielded. Only one fire giant remained, condemned to guard the seal, a living monument to his people's defeat. This victory was a clear message to any who would oppose the Golden Order. Resistance was futile. Similarly, the Golden Order persecuted the ancient dragons. These magnificent creatures, once rulers of the lands between, possessed immense power and a deep connection to the primordial forces of the world. Their scales, their breath, their very existence spoke of an age before the Erd Tree. The Golden Order, in its relentless pursuit of absolute dominion, saw the dragons as rivals, as symbols of an older order that needed to be subsumed or destroyed. Many dragons were hunted to extinction, their ancient cities reduced to ruins, their power broken. However, some, like the venerable Fortisax, a powerful ancient dragon, chose to become allies of the Golden Order, forming pacts and even serving as companions to figures like Godwyn the Golden, Marika's son. This pragmatic approach allowed the Golden Order to incorporate some of the dragon's power and prestige into its own narrative, presenting itself as the ultimate unifier, even of ancient enemies. Yet the underlying message remained: conform or perish. The dragon's subjugation was another testament to the Golden Order's overwhelming might and its willingness to crush any who stood in its way. To solidify Marika's rule and firmly establish the Erd Tree's dominance, the Golden Order established the Golden Lineage. This was a system of rule based on bloodline, with Marika at its apex. Godfrey, a legendary warrior of immense strength and courage, was chosen as Marika's consort and became the first Elden Lord. His union with Marika produced several demigod children, creating a powerful dynasty that would rule the lands between for centuries. The Golden Lineage was not merely a political structure, it was a divine right, a testament to Marika's supreme authority and the Erd Tree's blessing. This system of hereditary rule ensured stability and continuity, but also fostered a sense of entitlement and an increasing detachment from the common people. The demigods, born with immense power and divine lineage, became figures of awe and reverence, but also of increasing distance from the concerns of ordinary mortals. Under the unwavering banner of the Golden Order, its influence expanded across the entire breadth of the lands between. Its missionaries, its armies, and its scholars spread its doctrines, converting or conquering various cultures and peoples. The once diverse tapestry of beliefs and traditions began to unravel, replaced by the uniform golden threads of the Erd Tree. From the windswept plains of Limgrave to the treacherous swamps of Caelid, the Golden Order's reach extended, absorbing or crushing all who stood in its path. The various tribes and kingdoms, once independent, found themselves either integrated into the Golden Order's hierarchy or subjugated by its military might. This expansion was not always peaceful. Many ancient cultures were forcibly assimilated, their unique identities slowly eroded under the relentless pressure of the Golden Order's ideology. The Golden Order saw itself as the bringer of enlightenment, the sole path to truth, and therefore its expansion was viewed as a benevolent act, even when it involved bloodshed and cultural destruction. To further solidify its spiritual authority, the Golden Order developed the concept of grace. Grace was presented as a divine blessing from the Erd Tree itself, a golden light that guided its chosen champions. Those imbued with grace were seen as favored by the Erd Tree, destined for greatness, and empowered to enact the Golden Order's will. This concept served as a powerful tool for social control and motivation. It provided a spiritual justification for the Golden Order's actions, and it inspired loyalty and devotion among its followers. The flickering of grace, the subtle guidance it offered, became a tangible manifestation of the Erd Tree's presence in the world, a constant reminder of its watchful eye and its benevolent hand. For the Tarnished, the player character, the guidance of grace is a central mechanic, a literal path forward in a shattered world, highlighting its significance within the Golden Order's framework. However, not all outer gods could be so easily dismissed or integrated. The Golden Order sought to eliminate all traces of the Formless Mother and her followers, the Mohg dynasty. The Formless Mother, an outer god associated with blood and debasement, represented a direct antithesis to the Golden Order's ideals of purity and order. Her followers, led by Mohg, Lord of Blood, one of Marika's demigod children, practiced rituals that involved blood sacrifice and the defilement of the Golden Order's sacred tenets. This cult, operating in the shadows, was a constant thorn in the side of the Golden Order, a festering wound that threatened its carefully constructed facade. The Golden Order's attempts to eradicate the Mohg dynasty were fierce and relentless, reflecting the deep ideological chasm between the two. The Formless Mother's existence and Mohg's defiance represented a fundamental challenge to Marika's absolute authority, a dark mirror reflecting the Golden Order's own hidden cruelties. Despite its outward display of power and its seemingly unshakable authority, the Golden Order began to show signs of internal decay and stagnation. The absence of true death, initially conceived as a blessing, gradually became a curse. Without the natural cycle of life and death, without the constant renewal that death provides, the world became ossified. Progress slowed, innovation withered, and the very spirit of the lands between began to stagnate. The rigid enforcement of its doctrines, while ensuring conformity, also stifled dissent and prevented any meaningful adaptation. The Golden Order, in its relentless pursuit of perfection and control, had inadvertently created a system that was inherently unsustainable. The seeds of its eventual collapse were sown not by external forces, but by its own fundamental design flaws. The false immortality, the suppression of diversity, and the relentless pursuit of an unchanging ideal ultimately led to a brittle, inflexible system ripe for shattering. The Golden Order, in its desperate attempt to achieve eternal stability, had condemned itself to eternal stagnation, a gilded cage with no exit. We now arrive at perhaps the most pivotal and tragic event in the history of the lands between, one that irrevocably altered its destiny and set the stage for your own journey. This is the late age of the Erd Tree, the era of the shattering itself. For countless millennia, the Golden Order, under the benevolent yet inscrutable rule of Queen Marika, had maintained a fragile peace, largely due to the integrity of the Elden Ring. But even divine order can be undone by the machinations of ambitious individuals and the inherent flaws within a seemingly perfect system. Our narrative begins with a decision made by Queen Marika herself, one that, in retrospect, carried the seeds of future calamity. In her infinite wisdom, or perhaps her profound fear of true death, Marika chose to remove the rune of death from the Elden Ring. This wasn't merely a symbolic act, it was a fundamental alteration to the very fabric of existence in the lands between. The rune of death, also known as destined death, is the ultimate end, the finality that grants true mortality. By sealing it away, Marika ensured that no one, not even the gods themselves, could truly die. Instead, they would simply return to the Erd Tree, their souls absorbed into its golden embrace. This act of divine intervention effectively rendered all beings in the lands between immortal, or at least perpetually respawning. The Rune of Death, once a natural component of the Elden Ring's power, was entrusted to her shadow, the loyal and formidable beast clergyman Malekith. Malekith, a being of immense power and unwavering devotion, sealed this dangerous rune within his own body, becoming its eternal guardian. His very existence was a prison for destined death, ensuring that no one could wield its power to bring about a true and permanent end. This act, while seemingly intended to preserve life and order, inadvertently created a world where suffering could be prolonged indefinitely, and true release became an impossibility. The implications of this decision would reverberate through the ages, culminating in the events that would soon unfold. Enter Ranni the Witch, an Empyrean, one of a select few chosen by the Two Fingers to potentially succeed Queen Marika as a god. Empyreans are beings of immense power, destined for divinity, but this destiny often comes with a heavy price, a loss of self, a subservience to the greater will, and its envoys, the Two Fingers. Ranni, however, harbored a fierce independence and a deep-seated desire to escape this predetermined fate. She loathed the idea of being merely a puppet, a vessel for an outer god's will. To shed her Empyrean flesh, and thus her connection to the Two Fingers, Ranni conceived a daring and sacrilegious plot. She conspired with the Black Knife Assassins, a shadowy group of female Numen, the same race as Queen Marika herself, known for their stealth and deadly proficiency. These assassins, whose motives remain shrouded in mystery, but are believed to have harbored their own grievances against the Golden Order, became Ranni's instruments in a scheme that would shake the very foundations of the lands between. Their allegiance to Ranni was absolute, driven by a shared desire to dismantle the existing order, or perhaps for a promise of a new one. The cornerstone of Ranni's plan was the acquisition of a fragment of the Rune of Death. She orchestrated its theft from Malekith's keeping, a feat that speaks volumes about her cunning and the capabilities of her assassins. Malekith, the shadow of Marika, was not merely a guardian, he embodied the rune of death. Extracting even a fragment of it would have required an act of immense power and precision, likely exploiting a moment of vulnerability or employing a deception of unimaginable scale. The exact details of how this theft occurred are obscured by time and secrecy, but its success was undeniable. This stolen fragment, imbued with the power of true mortality, was then woven into the very blades wielded by the Black Knife assassins. Their daggers, already formidable, became instruments of absolute finality, capable of inflicting death in its purest form, bypassing the Erd Tree's cycle of rebirth. This transformation of their weapons was a crucial step, turning them from mere killers into agents of destined death itself. The implications were terrifying. For the first time since Marika sealed the rune away, true death could be inflicted upon the inhabitants of the lands between, even upon the demigods. The stage was set for the Night of Black Knives, a night that would forever be etched in the annals of the lands between as a turning point of unparalleled horror. On this fated night, the Black Knife assassins, led by the enigmatic and ruthless Electo, infiltrated the capital, Leyndell, the heart of the Golden Order. Their target was Godwyn the Golden, Marika's beloved firstborn son, a paragon of chivalry and strength, revered by all. Godwyn was not merely a demigod, he represented the very essence of the Golden Order's ideals. His murder was not just an assassination, it was a symbolic strike at the heart of Marika's reign and the stability of the lands between. The assassins, moving with spectral silence and deadly efficiency, found Godwyn and with their death-imbued blades brutally murdered him. The unique nature of the Rune of Death's application, however, led to a horrifying and unforeseen consequence. While Godwyn's soul died, irrevocably severed from his body and the cycle of the Erd Tree, his physical form lived on. This was not a resurrection, but a grotesque corruption, a mockery of life. His body became the Prince of Death, a decaying, undying horror, its influence spreading like a blight across the land, manifesting as Deathroot and the insidious presence of those who live in death. The death of Godwyn was not a clean end. It was a twisted, partial death that left behind a lingering, festering wound upon the world. The horror of Godwyn's fate, a soul dead but a body eternally alive and decaying, was a testament to the unpredictable and terrifying power of destined death when wielded improperly or partially. Simultaneously, as Godwyn met his gruesome end, Ranni the Witch enacted her own part of the plan. Using the very same stolen rune of death fragment, she killed her own Empyrean flesh. This was not a suicide in the conventional sense, but a ritualistic act of self-severance. Her soul, however, remained intact, free from the confines of her physical body, and crucially, free from the influence and control of the two fingers. She effectively achieved her desired freedom, becoming a spiritual entity, a spectral presence inhabiting a doll body. This simultaneous death of a demigod's soul and an Empyrean's flesh created a paradox, a split in the Rune of Death's power that would have profound and lasting implications for the lands between. The two halves of the Rune of Death's power, one inflicting soul death and the other's flesh death, were unleashed upon the world, creating an imbalance that would manifest in various forms of undeath and corruption. The demigods, particularly Godwyn's siblings, were consumed by a profound sense of horror and rage at his death. Godwyn was not only their brother, but a universally beloved figure, a symbol of hope and unity. His brutal and inexplicable demise sent shockwaves through the royal family, shattering any semblance of peace or stability. The murder of the Golden Prince, coupled with the blasphemous use of destined death, was an unforgivable affront. This collective grief and fury, fueled by the unsettling nature of Godwyn's partial death, began to unravel the fragile bonds that held the demigod family together. Each demigod reacted in their own way, some withdrawing into despair, others seeking vengeance, and still others seeing an opportunity in the ensuing chaos. Queen Marika, the divine ruler of the lands between, was utterly consumed by grief and rage. The death of her beloved firstborn, Godwyn, was a blow she could not bear. But it was not just the loss of her son that drove her to such an extreme act. It was also the profound violation of the rune of death. Her carefully constructed system of immortality had been breached, and the very fabric of existence she had painstakingly woven was now torn. In a moment of unimaginable anguish and fury, Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring. This was not a metaphorical act. It was a literal, physical fracturing of the divine artifact that embodied the very concept of order and law in the lands between. Her motives for this drastic action are complex and debated. Was it an act of despair, an attempt to destroy the source of her sorrow, or a desperate measure to prevent further corruption and suffering? Regardless of her precise intent, the consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The shattering of the Elden Ring plunged the lands between into an unprecedented era of chaos. Its immense power, once concentrated and unified, was now fractured among Marika's demigod offspring. Each demigod, in the immediate aftermath of the shattering, claimed a shard of the Elden Ring, known as a Great Rune. These great runes, imbued with immense and distinct powers, became both a blessing and a curse. They amplified the demigods' already formidable abilities, but also fueled their ambitions and exacerbated their inherent flaws. The once unified royal family, already fractured by grief and suspicion, now found themselves pitted against each other in a desperate and brutal struggle for dominance. The demigods, now possessing these powerful great runes, began to wage war against each other in a relentless and bloody bid for supremacy. Each believed they had the rightful claim to the shattered Elden Ring. Each sought to become the Elden Lord and restore a semblance of order, albeit an order under their own rule. This devastating conflict, driven by greed, ambition, and unresolved grief, became known as the Shattering. It tore the lands between apart, leaving it scarred and ravaged. Once thriving cities lay in ruins. Verdant landscapes were transformed into battlefields, and countless lives were lost in the senseless struggle. The once golden age of the Erd Tree had ended, replaced by an era of unending conflict and despair. The very land itself bore the wounds of this cataclysmic war, its beauty marred by the endless cycles of violence. In the wake of such profound sacrilege and widespread devastation, the Greater Will, the outer god that had overseen the lands between and guided the Golden Order, abandoned Marika and the demigods. The Elden Ring, its most potent instrument of influence, was shattered, and its chosen champions had descended into fratricidal war. This abandonment was not a sudden, dramatic departure, but a gradual withdrawal of its divine guidance, leaving the lands between adrift without its celestial shepherd. The Two Fingers, the Greater Will's envoys, fell silent, their pronouncements becoming increasingly rare and cryptic. This divine silence was perhaps the most unsettling consequence of the shattering, leaving the inhabitants of the lands between feeling truly alone, their faith shaken, and their future uncertain. The absence of the greater will's guiding hand further exacerbated the chaos, as there was no longer a clear divine authority to mediate the conflicts or restore order. The lands between, once a realm blessed by an outer god, was now a desolate testament to unchecked ambition and the devastating consequences of a shattered divine order. Following the devastating cataclysm of the shattering, the lands between descended into an even more profound abyss of conflict and despair. This brings us to the post-shattering war era, a period defined by the brutal war of the demigods. With the Elden Ring sundered into great runes, each claimed by one of Marika's demigod children, any semblance of order dissolved. The very fabric of the world was torn asunder, not by divine decree, but by the insatiable ambition and fractured loyalties of a family consumed by power. It was a war of unprecedented scale and savagery, fought across every corner of the lands between, leaving scars that would never truly heal. Among the first to reveal his true, horrifying nature was Godric the Grafted. Driven by a desperate, almost pathological need for power and a deep-seated insecurity stemming from his perceived weakness compared to his more formidable siblings, Godric began his grotesque experiments within the once proud walls of Stormvale Castle. He wasn't simply collecting trophies of his victories, but rather, in a perversion of the very act of conquest, he was literally integrating the limbs of defeated warriors, both common soldiers and minor nobles, onto his own body. This wasn't merely a display of dominance, but a ritualistic act of self-mutilation and augmentation, a horrifying attempt to literally absorb the strength of his foes. Each new limb, each grotesque appendage, was a testament to his ambition and his profound fear of inadequacy. The constant screams echoing from Stormvale, the flickering lights of the surgical fires, painted a grim picture of a demigod who had truly lost his way, sacrificing his humanity for a twisted vision of might. His ambition was a festering wound, and the bodies of his enemies were merely raw material for his monstrous transformation. Meanwhile, far to the east, another demigod, Radon, the general of the Star Scourge, was engaged in a monumental act of cosmic defiance. A formidable warrior and master of gravity magic, Radon possessed a power so immense that he could literally hold the very stars in place. His motivation for this seemingly impossible feat was deeply personal and rooted in a profound love for his mother, Rennala, the Queen of the Full Moon. Rennala, a sorceress of unparalleled skill, had long been associated with the celestial bodies, her wisdom and power intertwined with the movements of the stars. It was believed that if the stars were allowed to move freely, they would reveal a prophecy, a fate that would befall Rennala, a fate that Radon desperately sought to prevent. Perhaps it was a prophecy of her demise, or perhaps of a further decline into madness, but whatever the specific nature of the revelation, Radon's act was one of immense filial devotion. He became a living anchor, a cosmic bulwark, preventing the natural order of the heavens from unfolding, all to shield his mother from a destiny he feared. This act, while preventing one tragedy, inadvertently set the stage for others, subtly altering the very fabric of fate in the lands between. The consequences of these individual ambitions and acts of defiance were felt acutely across the entire continent. The lands between, once a realm of divine grace and burgeoning civilization, were systematically ravaged. Cities were reduced to rubble, fertile plains became barren wastelands, and countless lives were extinguished in the endless, senseless conflict. The demigods, once revered as divine offspring, had become instruments of destruction, their personal grievances and desires for power manifesting as widespread devastation. The common folk, caught between the warring factions, suffered unimaginable hardships. Famine, plague, and constant fear became their daily companions. The very concept of a unified realm, once held together by the Golden Order, shattered into 1,000 pieces, each shard a battleground. The war was not just a clash of armies, but a grinding, relentless erosion of hope and life itself. Amidst this chaos, Rennala, Queen of the Full Moon, retreated into the hallowed halls of the Grand Library of Raya Lucarian Academy. Her heart, already broken by the departure of her beloved Radagon, was further burdened by the escalating war and the knowledge of her son Radahun's desperate efforts to protect her. She found solace, or perhaps a deeper form of sorrow, in the quiet solitude of the library, surrounded by ancient texts and the echoes of a past era. Her only true comfort was the amber egg, a gift from Radagon, which she clutched perpetually. This egg, a symbol of their lost love and perhaps a vessel for a future hope, became her sole focus, a tangible link to a time before the shattering, before the war, before her world crumbled. She was a queen without a kingdom, a mother in mourning, her mind increasingly detached from the brutal realities of the world outside the Academy's walls, lost in a labyrinth of grief and memory. The escalating conflict reached its horrifying crescendo in the plains of Caelid, where two of the most powerful demigods, Malenia, the Blade of Miquella, and Radan, Starscourge General, finally clashed. This was not merely a battle, but a cataclysm, a clash of titans that would forever alter the landscape and destiny of the lands between. Malenia, a warrior of unparalleled grace and deadly precision, was driven by a fierce loyalty to her twin brother, Miquella, and a desire to see him ascend to godhood. Radan, a colossal figure of immense strength and gravity magic, fought with the unwavering resolve of a general protecting his domain and perhaps his mother's fate. Their duel was a spectacle of impossible power, shaking the very foundations of the earth. The skies above Caelid were torn by their magic, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and the air crackled with their divine energy. However, the true horror of their encounter lay not in the raw power displayed, but in the devastating consequence of Malenia's ultimate weapon. As the battle raged, and both demigods pushed themselves to their absolute limits, Malenia, in a desperate act of self-preservation and perhaps a final, agonizing surge of power, unleashed the Scarlet Rot. This wasn't merely a disease, but a horrific, sentient plague, a festering corruption that manifested as a crimson tide, consuming everything in its path. The plains of Caelid, once a vibrant landscape, were instantly transformed into a grotesque, blighted wasteland. Trees withered and twisted into skeletal forms. The earth itself turned a sickly red, and any living creature caught in its wake was horribly mutated, their bodies consumed by the relentless rot. It was a plague of divine origin, a curse unleashed upon the land, turning a battlefield into a monument of unspeakable suffering. The Scarlet Rot was a manifestation of Malenia's own internal struggle, her inherent affliction turned outward with devastating effect, a macabre mirroring of her own decaying body. In the aftermath of this cataclysmic release, Malenia, the source of the Scarlet Rot, succumbed to its overwhelming power. Her body, already weakened by her own inherent affliction, was ravaged by the unleashed plague. She fell, defeated not by Radan's blade, but by the very weapon she wielded. Her loyal Cleanrot knights, fiercely devoted to their goddess, carried her away from the blighted plains. Their mission was to transport her to the Haligtree, a sacred sanctuary created by Michaela, where she could find respite and hopefully healing. There, amidst the protective embrace of the Haligtree, Malenia entered a deep slumber, a state of suspended animation, her body slowly being consumed by the rot, awaiting a time when she might awaken and fulfill her destiny. Her defeat, though not a death, marked a profound turning point in the war, signaling the immense cost of such divine power. Radon, too, was irrevocably scarred by the encounter. Afflicted by the Scarlet Rot, his once sharp mind began to unravel. The insidious plague seeped into his consciousness, slowly eroding his reason and replacing it with a primal, insatiable hunger. He lost all semblance of his former self, the proud general reduced to a mindless beast. He endlessly wandered the wailing dunes of Kyled, a tragic figure consumed by madness. His once noble purpose, his desire to protect his mother, was replaced by a grotesque compulsion to devour anything and everything in his path, particularly the fallen warriors who littered the blighted landscape. He became a living testament to the destructive power of the Scarlet Rot, a once great demigod transformed into a ravenous, mindless horror, a shadow of his former glory, forever trapped in a cycle of hunger and despair within the very lands he once sought to protect. His former warhorse, Leonard, remained by his side, a loyal companion to the bitter end, a silent witness to his master's tragic decline. While his siblings waged their brutal, open war, Morgoth, the Omen king, played a far more subtle yet equally crucial role. From within the gilded walls of Leyndell, the royal capital, he secretly defended the Erdtree. Unlike his ambitious siblings, Morgoth harbored no desire for the Elden Ring for himself. Instead, his sole purpose was to protect the integrity of the Golden Order and the sacred Erdtree, a duty he felt compelled to uphold, despite being an Omen, a cursed being ostracized by the very order he sought to preserve. He fought tirelessly, often in disguise, against any who dared approach the capital with hostile intent, repelling his warring siblings and their armies with fierce determination. He was the unsung hero, the hidden guardian, his efforts largely unacknowledged and unappreciated by the very people he protected. His loyalty was unwavering, a stark contrast to the self-serving ambitions of his kin, making his sacrifice all the more poignant. His existence was a paradox, a cursed king defending a golden ideal that rejected him. Further to the west, in the fiery depths of Volcano Manor, Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy, embarked on a path of unspeakable transgression. Driven by a radical desire to defy the greater will, the cosmic entity that governed the lands between, Rykard sought power beyond the conventional. He believed that true freedom lay in absolute blasphemy, in consuming the very essence of the divine. In a horrific act of self-sacrifice and transformation, he willingly fed himself to the god-devouring serpent. This wasn't a passive act, but a deliberate merging, a fusion of his own being with the ancient monstrous serpent. Through this unholy union, Rykard aimed to become a new, terrifying entity, capable of devouring even the gods themselves, thereby dismantling the existing cosmic order and forging a new path, free from the dictates of the greater will. His transformation was a chilling testament to his extreme ideology, a complete rejection of the divine for a blasphemous, monstrous power. Simultaneously, in the shadowy depths of the Haligtree, a different kind of abduction took place. Mohg, Lord of Blood, driven by a perverse and obsessive devotion to his twin brother Miquella, enacted a clandestine plan. Miquella, though immensely powerful, was trapped in an eternal childhood, unable to mature due to an unknown curse. Mohg, believing Miquella to be the rightful heir to godhood, and perhaps fueled by a twisted form of love and ambition, abducted him from the Halleck tree. His intention was to elevate Miquella to a true god, to create a new dynasty, a new order centered around his beloved brother. He sought to achieve this through ritualistic blood magic and dark, forbidden arts, believing that through such means, Miquella could finally transcend his cursed state and become the true divine ruler of the lands between. This act, shrouded in secrecy and fueled by a dark, incestuous devotion, further complicated the already fractured political landscape, introducing a new, insidious threat. Ultimately, despite the immense destruction and countless lives lost, the War of the Demigods concluded not with a decisive victory, but with a bitter, agonizing stalemate. No single demigod proved strong enough, or perhaps cunning enough, to claim dominion over the entirety of the lands between. Their individual ambitions, their fractured loyalties, and their immense destructive powers canceled each other out, leaving a devastated world in their wake. The Elden Ring remained shattered, its great runes scattered among the warring factions, each holding a piece of the ultimate power, yet none able to wield it in its entirety. The war simply sputtered out, leaving behind a power vacuum and a realm teetering on the brink of complete collapse, a land scarred and broken, awaiting a new catalyst for change. It was in this desperate, fractured state that a forgotten prophecy began to stir. The tarnished, individuals once exiled from the lands between and stripped of the grace of the Erdtree were now called back. A faint, ethereal light, the guidance of grace, began to manifest, beckoning them from their distant exiles. Their purpose was clear: to seek the scattered shards of the Elden Ring, to mend the broken artifact, and to ultimately become the Elden Lord. You, the player, are one of these tarnished, drawn back to a land ravaged by war and divine madness, tasked with a monumental quest that would determine the very fate of the lands between. Your journey begins in a world steeped in tragedy, a world waiting for a hero, or perhaps another harbinger of destruction. None of the fleeting conflicts or the grand ambitions of the Golden Order could compare to the slow, insidious horror that began to unfurl across the lands between, primarily in the post-shattering era. This was the era of the Scarlet Rot's relentless spread, a plague unlike any other, not merely a disease, but the manifestation of an outer god's malevolent will. The Scarlet Rot is not simply a blight. It is the physical embodiment of an alien deity, an outer god whose very essence is decay and consumption. This nameless entity, shrouded in cosmic horror, seeks nothing less than the complete engulfment of all life in the lands between, transforming vibrant ecosystems into festering pustules and living beings into grotesque, fungal abominations driven by an insatiable, mindless urge to spread its contagion. It is a slow, agonizing corruption, a living death that promises not an end, but an eternity of putrefaction. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, was born an Empyrean, a demigod chosen by the greater will to potentially succeed Marika. Yet her birth was also a tragedy, for she was afflicted from her very inception with the Scarlet Rot. This wasn't merely a birth defect, it was a profound cosmic curse, intertwining her fate with the outer god of rot itself. Malenia became, in essence, a living vessel for this horrific power, her very existence a testament to its insidious influence. Her body, though outwardly beautiful and impossibly strong, was a constant battleground, a fragile shell containing an apocalyptic force. The rot was a part of her, a dormant terror that threatened to erupt and consume everything around her, including herself. Her twin brother, Miquella, another Empyrean of immense power and compassion, dedicated his entire existence to finding a cure for Malenia's affliction. He poured his formidable intellect and unyielding will into this seemingly impossible task. Miquella, driven by an almost saintly love for his sister, understood the profound danger the rot posed, not just to Malenia, but to all life. He cultivated the Halig tree, a colossal, living structure intended to become a haven, a sanctuary from the outer god's influence, and a place where he hoped to nurture a cure for his sister. His efforts were tireless, his commitment absolute, yet the rot remained, a constant shadow over their lives. He sought to transcend the influence of the greater will and the other outer gods, believing that true salvation lay in severing their ties to these cosmic entities. His research into unalloyed gold, a substance believed to be immune to the influence of outer gods, was a direct attempt to forge a weapon, a shield against the Scarlet Rot. He understood that the rot was not merely a physical malady, but a spiritual one, a corruption of the very essence of life, and thus a purely mundane cure would be insufficient. His pursuit of a perfect being, one untouched by the flaws and curses of the world, was inextricably linked to his desire to free Malenia from her agonizing fate. He crafted the needle of unalloyed gold, a potent artifact designed to suppress the influence of outer gods, hoping it could alleviate Malenia's suffering, if not entirely cure her. This needle represented his greatest hope, a testament to his unwavering dedication and his profound sorrow over his sister's plight. Then came the shattering, the cataclysmic war that tore the lands between asunder after Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring. The demigods, children of Marika, plunged the realm into chaos, each vying for supremacy and fragments of the Elden Ring. In this tumultuous period, Malenia, Blade of Miquella, rose to action. With her loyal Clean Rot Knights, a devoted retinue of warriors who pledged their lives to her, she marched towards Caelid. Her objective was clear: to confront Starscourge Radon, one of the most formidable demigods, whose immense gravitational power held the very stars in place, preventing the natural flow of fate and potentially hindering Miquella's efforts. Radon, a colossal figure of immense strength and strategic genius, had amassed a vast army in Caelid, a barren, windswept region known for its harsh conditions. The confrontation between Malenia and Radon in Caelid was an event of unparalleled devastation, a battle that would forever scar the land. Their clash was not merely a skirmish, it was a cataclysm. Radon, riding his scrawny, beloved steed Leonard, commanded gravitational magic that could pull meteors from the sky, while Malenia, a master of swift, elegant, and deadly swordplay, moved with a grace that belied her immense power. The sheer force of their blows reshaped the landscape, carving canyons and raising dust clouds that blotted out the sun. The Clean Rot Knights, though brave, were mere mortals caught in the maelstrom of two demigods unleashed. They fought with unwavering loyalty, their golden armor gleaming amidst the chaos, but even their dedication could not fully protect them from the overwhelming power on display. Radon's gravitational magic tore through their ranks, while Malenia's blade, imbued with the nascent power of the rot, cut down all who stood in her path. The battle raged for an indeterminate period, a clash of titans that pushed both demigods to their absolute limits. The land itself screamed under the strain of their struggle, the very fabric of reality seemingly threatened by their immense power. As their climactic duel reached its zenith, with both demigods pushed to the brink of defeat, Malenia made a desperate, fateful decision. Cornered and facing imminent defeat, she unleashed the full, unholy power of the Scarlet Rot that festered within her. This was not a controlled release. It was a cataclysmic explosion, a bloom of unimaginable horror. For the very first time, the dormant outer god of rot truly manifested through its vessel. The air itself became thick with spores, a sickly crimson mist that enveloped everything. Malenia, in that moment, transformed into a terrifying avatar of decay, her body erupting with fungal growths, and her very essence becoming a conduit for the outer god's destructive will. This was the first of her 3 infamous blooms, a moment of profound cosmic significance that altered the destiny of Caelid forever. The sheer, overwhelming power of this unleashed rot was too much even for Star-Scourge Radon, a demigod who had conquered the stars. His immense strength and resistance were no match for the insidious, all-consuming nature of the plague. He was overwhelmed, his formidable body corrupted, and his mind shattered by the onslaught. The rot did not kill him outright, but it broke him, reducing the proud Star-Scourge to a mindless beast, forever condemned to wander the plains of Caelid, feasting on the corpses of his fallen soldiers, a grotesque puppet of the outer god's influence. However, the unleashing of such immense destructive power came at a terrible cost to Malenia. The effort of containing and then releasing the full force of the Scarlet Rot was too great, even for an Empyrean. She collapsed, her body ravaged and her consciousness extinguished, falling into a deep, comatose slumber. The rot, having achieved its immediate objective, retreated within her, leaving her utterly spent. She lay amidst the devastation, a fragile figure amidst the ruins of a battlefield that had become a monument to her terrible power. The immediate aftermath of this cataclysmic event was the transformation of Caelid into a desolate wasteland, a stark and horrifying testament to the rot's destructive power. The once vibrant, though harsh landscape was now a nightmarish panorama of decay. The very soil turned crimson, bubbling with putrid growths, and the air became thick with noxious fumes and iridescent spores. The flora and fauna of Caelid were twisted and corrupted, transforming into grotesque, fungal abominations, their forms distorted by the relentless plague. The few surviving inhabitants of Caelid, those who hadn't fled or perished in the initial onslaught, were slowly but surely twisted by the plague. Their bodies became hosts for the rot, their minds warped, their flesh sprouting crimson fungi, their movements jerky and unnatural. They became living, suffering monuments to the outer god's insatiable hunger, driven by a primal urge to spread the contagion further. The land itself seemed to weep, its rivers turning to viscous crimson sludge, its trees gnarled and skeletal, adorned with pulsating cancerous growths. The vibrant life of Caelid was extinguished, replaced by a horrifying, alien ecosystem of decay. Even Malenia's loyal clean-rot knights, who had fought with such unwavering devotion, were not spared the rot's insidious touch. Despite their golden armor and their unwavering faith, the airborne spores and direct exposure to the bloom began to afflict them. Their bodies, though protected by their armor, slowly began to decay from within. Crimson growths sprouted from their joints, their skin became mottled, and their movements grew sluggish. Yet even in their suffering, their loyalty remained absolute. They continued to serve, their decaying forms a poignant symbol of their devotion to their afflicted queen. They were a tragic testament to the rot's indiscriminate nature, proving that even the strongest will and the purest loyalty could not withstand its relentless corruption. They were living sacrifices, their slow, agonizing transformation a constant reminder of the price of their devotion. Amidst the devastation, one night Finley, a clean-wrought knight of unparalleled loyalty and strength, undertook an impossible task. He carefully carried the comatose Malenia, his beloved queen, on his back, beginning a long and perilous journey back to the Haligtree. This was no ordinary trek. Finley navigated treacherous landscapes, evaded countless dangers, and battled relentless enemies, all while protecting his unconscious charge. His journey was a testament to his unwavering devotion, a heroic act of self-sacrifice in a world consumed by chaos. He eventually succeeded, bringing Malenia back to the sanctuary of the Haligtree, a place Miquella had meticulously crafted as a haven. There, amidst the golden leaves and nurturing embrace of the colossal tree, Malenia remained in slumber, her body slowly recovering from the devastating bloom, yet still a vessel for the dormant rot. Her presence at the Haligtree, even in her unconscious state, imbued the tree with a potent, albeit dangerous aura. Even after the shattering war subsided and the immediate chaos of Malenia's bloom faded, the Scarlet Rot continued to fester and spread. It was not a localized event, but a persistent, insidious threat. Spores carried by the wind, contaminated water, and afflicted creatures ensured its slow but relentless expansion. Caelid remained its epicenter, a blighted land that served as a constant source of contagion, but its tendrils began to reach further, threatening to engulf the entirety of the lands between. The rot became a constant, terrifying presence, a grim reminder of the outer god's enduring influence, and a threat to any remaining life that dared to flourish. It was a slow-motion apocalypse, a silent war waged by decay against existence itself. Deep beneath the Onsel River, a vast subterranean network of caves and waterways, lies the Lake of Rot. This horrifying expanse of crimson, viscous liquid is not merely a pool of contaminated water. It is a primordial source and a direct manifestation of the outer god's influence. It pulses with malevolent energy, its depths teeming with grotesque, rot-afflicted creatures. The Lake of Rot serves as a constant,